So the first poem I want to look at to help illustrate some of this shift is Robert Frost's 1916 poem, The Ovenbird. So here's the poem, which I'll take some time to just kind of read and then loosely explicate. I also have a video that I'm linking with Frost himself reading the poem. So if you want to read it again, you can. This is a sonnet, particularly this is a Petrarchan sonnet, which means it's broken into an 8 and a 6. In the 8, the octet, a problem will be put forward or something that needs resolution. And in the sestet, the last 6 lines, we'll see that resolution. Lots of seasonal imagery in here, as the poem, of course, is about this tiny little oven bird. So I just want to read the poem and then make a couple observations about the poem. There is a singer everyone has heard, loud a midsummer and a midwood bird who makes the solid tree trunks sound again. He says that leaves are old and that for flowers midsummer is to spring as 1 to 10. He says the early petal fall is past when pear and cherry bloom went down in showers on sunny days a moment overcast. And comes that other fall we name the fall. He says the highway dust is over all. The bird would cease and be as other birds, but that he knows in singing not to sing. The question that he frames in all but words is what to make of a diminished thing. Okay, a couple cool things just as we're working through poems. It's really helpful to kind of take it sentence by sentence, and thankfully we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences in this 14-line poem. And the first 3 sentences were introduced to the main speaker of the poem, a singer, and this singer is a bird. This image for the poet is a repetitive one that often links birds with poets and singers with poets. With the the clear desire to create this kind of connection or conjunction between the bird that's singing some song and the poet who is also singing some song. So we want to think about what this bird is saying, right? We get a sense of its setting. It's a midsummer and midwood bird, so it's out in the forest. It makes the solid tree trunk sound again. It's a loud sound, so much so that we have a sense of it reverberating through the trees. Now, I know that a lot is horrible in the world right now, but there's also some things that are kind of beautiful about this current time that we're in of spring. And I don't know if you've noticed, but birds are back and they're singing a lot. And I don't know if you've had this moment now that you're home where you're sleeping in because some of you can, and you're, snoozing the camera on the Zoom meeting so that you can grab a couple more Z's. And you just hear that one bird and it's just like, it's like an alarm clock, just like over and over and over repetitively. And you go to look and you're like, where is that freaking bird? And it's just this tiny little bird making this like repetitive, loud noise, right? And that's what this oven bird is. And his voice is so loud, a singer everyone has heard, a common bird, but also a loud bird, is making the very forest reverberate with his ability to sing. Not only that, though, but he's got a couple things to say. It's not just inarticulate. The sign or the presence of this bird suggests a couple things. And we know that, of course, when we see robins come back, right? When robins show up again, we say that's the first sign of spring. The robins are back, spring's on the way. And so this bird's presence has a couple things as well. Frost continues lines 4 and 5. He says that leaves are old, and that for flowers, midsummer is to spring as 1 to 10, right? He puts this quick ratio in, right? That there are, of course, more flowers in spring than there are in midsummer. If you're thinking midsummer, like late July and August, that's maybe like late summer, but maybe like that movement where we're kind of getting hazy or getting into those kind of long and oppressive days of summer where things aren't really growing as vitally anymore. But they're kind of, it's hot, it's really warm, right? He says as well that the early petal fall is past when pear and cherry bloom went down in showers on sunny days, a moment overcast. That is one of my favorite descriptions for spring. Right now, all the blooms are everywhere, right? We get these pear and cherry blossoms all over the place. Magnolia trees are blooming, and all of a sudden, very quickly, in like a weekend, they'll all be gone. Those initial blooms will fade away. And he's then telling us a couple things about where we are. He says we're in midsummer. That's the present, right? And midsummer is to spring is 1 to 10. He says spring is past. That early petal fall is past on those April showers that brought May flowers. We had those windy kind of overcast spring days and all the blossoms blew away. And if he's told us then about our present and about our past, the connection then should be to some kind of future. And then this idea comes in. Then comes that other fall we name the fall. Two usages of the word fall here. Now, as a Christian audience, we're used to that word carrying an allusion alongside it, right? A fall of man, something that feels degenerative. One way or the other, fall and the season itself gives us a sense of death and decay and of things that were formerly beautiful, these blossoms, now, of course, succumbing to the ravages of time. This next line, he says, the highway dust is over all, is an interesting connection there with highway and with dust. It's the first industrial image we get in this otherwise very agrarian poem. So far, it's been leaves and tree trunks and flowers and summer and spring and petals and blooms and showers and sunny. Highway, right? All of a sudden now we get this sense of something that feels mechanical and industrial, and it's a sign of humans for the first time. But then that dust as well suggests something that is decaying and dirty. A little bit later, when we read the sections of The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, he will say, I will show you fear in a handful of dust, which is a weird kind of thing to say, right? Why is dust scary? Why would fear be in a handful of dust? And I think this is what Eliot's talking about, and maybe a little bit what Frost is talking about too. Now, I'm wary of over-Christianizing Frost in this, right? But it's very clear that the curse in Genesis 3 is from dust you were taken, and to dust you will return. And the scary thing to think about here when we think about dust is that it's a remnant of death. And it's an understanding that the things that we are will decay. And if you had a handful of dust, you would get rid of it very easily, right? You would just blow it away. And that idea here is kind of stitched into this moment as this bird is trying to figure out what's coming. On one level, of course, naturally, the next thing is fall, and fall is symbolic of death. But there seems to be maybe something else that this bird is trying to get at. So the final four lines kind of paint that for us in relief, and there's some ambiguity in here that we'll discuss. The bird would cease and be as other birds, but that he knows in singing not to sing. Now, that is a puzzling paradox. What do you mean in singing not to sing? What is the bird trying to get at here? And the idea in this is that there's, again, something more to his singing. He's not just, to he who has an ear, let him hear kind of thing. He's not just singing. He's saying other things. There's other ideas going on in what he's trying to express. And so these last two lines kind of bring it home. Robert Frost wrote an essay called The Figure a Poem Makes. And he said that a poem should begin in delight and end in wisdom. And that's one of the reasons I think why Frost is so popular, is because by the time you get to the end of a Frost poem, you get something that feels kind of like rounded and secured and resolved, right? I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. We get these kinds of these big takeaway lines at the end. And so here's the last two lines of this poem. The question that he frames in all but words is what to make of a diminished thing. The question that he frames in all but words is what to make of a diminished thing. The to make idea here, I think you could take in two ways. In one way, you could view this as like a police squad coming to the scene of the crime, right? And they're saying, all right, kneeling down and looking at the evidence, what do you make of this? How do you interpret what's going on? What kind of idea can we put in that will give explanation to the chaos that we're seeing around us? And for Frost, writing this poem in 1916, the question is, how do you interpret what's happening, right? And as we said already, modernism is moving away from those old ways of interpreting. We're not really saying anymore, well, God, what is right, in that kind of Alexander Pope sort of way. We're not saying, well, government was going to answer all of our problems. We're not saying, well, let's believe in the rational, moral human being that the Enlightenment and science had us think about, because now we're seeing what kinds of things these rational and moral human beings have done. And they've invented machine guns, and they've invented mustard gas, and they've ripped up the European countryside with barbed wire and with trenches, and all of these things have happened out of the ingenuity of people. And that creates this space that says, what do we make of this? How do we interpret what's happening? The second way that you could see this is literally, how do you build on this? When you see mass destruction across the globe, what can we make? How do we build up what has been destroyed? How do we build up what's been taken away? The last idea here is not really a full-scale destruction, though I've led you to think it is. He says instead, what to make of a diminished thing. Not a fully destroyed thing, but a diminished thing. Some of you guys who are musical will know that a diminished chord, where you I think you flat the third and the fifth of the chord, creates this real dissonant sound. It's the sound in the old scary movies when the monster comes in and they go boom. That's the diminished chord. It creates this sense of like shock, and it's discordant to hear a diminished chord. It's not mellifluous. It's cacophonous. Now we get something here that just it doesn't ring well in our ears. Diminishment is like that Christmas morning when you expected it to be like this, and it was just like this, right? It wasn't like this. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't like the end of everything, but it was like you thought it was going to be awesome, and then it was just like a little bit less, right? It was like that trip to Disney World that got all hyped up and was going to be so cool, and you expected it to be here, like through the roof, and it was actually just here. And diminishment is that space. Right? This is weird doing a camera. The diminishment is just that space between your expectation and your reality, where you thought it was going to be better than it actually was. And Frost is asking us, how do we deal with this stuff? How do we come to terms with a world that's just not what it should be? These questions have never been more pertinent to ask than they are right now during this month in 2020. How do we make sense of the chaotic things that are happening in our world?